Hey everybody, this is a re-upload of one of Zaid aka Misanthropony's videos. He gave me permission to re-upload it to celebrate Revenge of the Fifth. I've already re-uploaded 4 of his videos onto my main channel. They will all be linked down below, and please go check out my new Star Wars playlist on my main channel as well. Anyways, let's get on with the video.
We're at Terror Alert Orange, which means something might go down somewhere in some way at some point in time, so look sharp!
Well, the old saying goes, old habits die hard. This year is a weird one to be a Star Wars fan, as this not only marks the 5th anniversary of The Last Jedi, but also the 10th anniversary of when Disney bought the rights to Lucasfilm.
What an unbelievable coincidence!
I announced plans for a video commemorating this occasion and claimed to keep it a secret until it was ready. Well, it's ready now, so let's get down to business. Time to upset some dipshits on Twitter. The Last Jedi was the beginning of the slow and painful death of the Star Wars legacy under the ownership of Disney. Some say it was The Force Awakens, but that's not what really hypercharged people's disapproval of the sequel trilogy. To say the movie was divisive would be a nice way of putting it, as to this day, the quality of the film is still being largely argued and discussed. Things like Luke's characterization, Rey being highly gifted in the Force despite knowing nothing about it, Kylo's complexity as a villain or lack thereof, the slew of continuity errors and inconsistencies with previous movies, and the uncanny tone given the film's repetitive sense of comedy. I eventually got involved in this little scuffle back in 2018 when I made a 6-part series reviewing the film, and it was met with some reasonable reception. There were people who liked it, and there were people with a more critical response to the video. Some of it was reasonable feedback that helped repolish and reconsider my approach to media criticism, but the rest of it was just angry butthurt fanboys who forgot what good storytelling is in favor of dramatic sounding themes. However, as time went on, I started looking back on this review and began to notice things that I could have and should have done differently. And so I began brainstorming ideas for re-reviewing The Last Jedi. Basically, I wanted to do the YouTube equivalent of what an artist does when revisiting their old work. I wanted to take another shot at reviewing this particular film with updated arguments and new points to evaluate how much my review skills have changed since I first talked about it. I started working on a script in 2020 since it felt like the right time given the disastrous aftermath of the rise of Palpatine, and on April 2021, it was finally released on YouTube. Since then, it's gained a lot of positive reception and has even surpassed the original review in terms of views. And I just want to take a moment to give my sincerest thank yous to everyone who helped make this happen. The feedback I've gotten for my work on this video has been incredible and has acted as a great motivator for working on my review of The Rise of Skywalker. People congratulating me for the time I put into it, thanking me for opening their eyes to how badly the film was made, pointing out flaws in the movie that I missed. It's stuff like this that makes reviewing media on YouTube a rewarding experience. Unfortunately, this is where the good news ends because, as we all know, thanks to Disney's incompetence, Star Wars has become a pretty contentious topic these days. While the overall reception of the video has been positive according to the analytics on my YouTube dashboard, there was inevitably going to be the people who would dislike, bomb, or complain about this on Twitter or elsewhere. Now, the negative reception doesn't really surprise me, as TLJ is still viewed as a sacred cow by a lot of people, but what I do want to talk about are 2 very particular points that they've regurgitated ad nauseum in an attempt to discredit my work, and this is where the title comes into play. When you see a video entitled The Worst Offenses for The Last Jedi, you might be thinking about something similar to what Robot Head did. That's not what we're going to be doing. Instead of going over the mountain of different comments and arguments people have used to excuse the stupid writing in this film, we're going to hyper-focus on 2 very specific responses to these kinds of videos. You might already know what they are, but for those who are unfamiliar, allow me to quickly machine gun through a number of lovely comments to preview the mental retardation we'll be deconstructing today.
Oh my.
I should be surprised that I even have to explain the problem here, but then I remember I live in an age where Netflix can feature CP on their servers and someone will actually praise it as creative art. Basically, this brain-dead feedback amounts to the commenter saying 2 things. 1, this review is several hours long, or longer than the piece of media being reviewed, and 2, this is a review of a movie that came out 3.5 years ago. And this is a bad thing because, well, it's not, but we'll get into that as we move forward. This isn't the first time they've used these excuses, and it's definitely not gonna be the last. And it's also not the first time I've responded to the idiots making these statements, as I demonstrated in the pinned comment of my updated review. At first I was thinking of doing something similar to my Space Jam 2 and Invincible video, where I simply show the comments one by one and briefly mock them. But I came to realize that would be inappropriate considering the seriousness of the situation. This is something I have to respond to in full, as these are not only intellectually stunted responses to my review, but it's something that's becoming a bigger and bigger problem in terms of reactionary responses to media criticism on YouTube. First, let's talk about the long review bad argument. This is made by people who think it's ridiculous for a review of a piece of media to be several hours long or longer than the media being discussed. A lot of people say this started with Mueller, but the thing is, it's not this newly discovered concept. Long video essays have been on YouTube since the earlier years, dating back to Pinklet's review of The Phantom Menace. In the last few years, however, these longer videos have been starting to get more attention, so it's only fair we start addressing this now. So, these people want to make the argument that a movie review that's several hours long or longer than the film itself is ridiculous. An argument that ends up becoming meaningless the more you look into the pattern in which people leave this feedback. Now, at first glance it may look daunting for a movie review to be that long, but then you take the time to actually watch it and see what the video has to say. I've taken the time to watch several of these longer video essays, and they're actually really interesting after getting used to the length. You can tell that a lot of work and passion goes into these videos considering the amount of time spent editing, audio recording, and collecting footage from several sources. There's a lot of initiative to these videos that you just can't get from a review that's like 10 to 25 minutes long. So if these videos have a lot of good content to offer, why are there people complaining about the length? Well, if you take the time to look at these comments back to back, you'll notice the obvious problem. They say the video is bad because it's long, but do they ever say why that's a bad thing? Remember that montage from earlier where I quickly went over people who made these comments? Notice how they specifically target the length of the video and then say absolutely nothing else about it. The obvious reason for this is because they didn't even watch the video in question. They just get triggered by the runtime and go to leave a hate comment, and immediately close the tab acting like they accomplished something. This is basically what it looks like. This video is too long. Okay, what about the video makes it too long? I don't know, I didn't watch it. The main crux for why this argument is horrible is that it's so effortless and lazy. They can't be bothered to actually engage with the video enough to use an excuse by stating the obvious. Yes, the video has a long runtime, and what else? It's a hollow point with no weight because saying the video is long doesn't actually say anything about the video. Let's try going by a smaller scale example to understand why this doesn't work. For a while there was this trend going on amongst MCU fans called One Marvelous Scene, in which they would select a scene from one of the movies and go into detail about its deeper meaning. While each video covers different scenes from different movies, the basic formula is the same. Going over a particular key moment in the story and explaining how it's great, and how it's supported by scenes that came before and after. This doesn't make them bad though. On the contrary, they're very well put together and interesting videos that offer some good insight on the scenes they're discussing. However, if we were to go by the logic of the longer than the movie itself argument these idiots spew, then every single one of these videos are terrible and made specifically for views and ad revenue. The final confrontation between Vision and Ultron is about 1.5 minutes long, and this video analyzing it is like 13 times the length. Well, I guess that makes Josh Boy 64 a talentless hack. This argument has about the same sentimental value as judging a book by its cover. I mean, if they really think a review longer than the thing being reviewed is so bad, that means we have to make every review of a short film about 3 minutes long. Speed run that shit, lest we make it longer than the short film itself. Here's what the argument is ultimately saying. You have to make your review of a movie less than 40 minutes long, or it's wrong.
Okay, now let's try to get an answer from someone who's not a complete retard.
This does not work because it doesn't function as an argument for the content within the video. Going by my own example, I do not like nostalgia critics to boldly flee, but not because of its length. I see a lot of people pointing out its length as a top reason for why it's bad, barring the fact that it was meant to be viewed in smaller fragments. To Boldly Flee was an 8-part miniseries, not a 3.5-hour movie. Someone on YouTube just took the time to put all the pieces together. These comments are completely worthless because they explain nothing about the substance of those 3.5 hours of content. To Boldly Flee isn't bad because it's 3.5 hours long, it's bad because it's a horribly written, horribly paced mess, filled with unbearably unfunny jokes and all of its side and supporting characters being terribly utilized for the sake of inflating Doug's immeasurable ego. In spite of it being the third entry in a trilogy of parody and satire, it takes itself bizarrely seriously, making it feel completely detached from the other 2 anniversary specials. The special effects are inexcusably cheap considering the amount of money the website was making at the time, and every single second is an egregious reminder of what a brilliant, talented, and misunderstood writer, actor, and director Doug believes himself to be. And for those who are gonna try and refute this by saying it's a bad example by saying To Boldly Flee is in a movie review, my point still stands. If I never saw To Boldly Flee and I was going by these comments alone, I would be learning nothing about To Boldly Flee. Because these comments that choose to hyperfocus on the length of the video are actively undermining the actual problem. People who argue that it's wrong to make a lengthy review just because they demand the video be short enough for their attention span completely misunderstand the concept of discussing media in the first place. The reason why we discuss media in length is because we do it as a labor of love for art. We do it as an expression of things we're passionate about. To talk about why a piece of media deserves to be loved or why it deserves to be hated. To explain why it's meaningful or soulless. Do you really think JXE made her Doctor Who video as long as it was because she just hates Doctor Who and wants to ruin people's enjoyment of it? The only other reason I would think they would argue against a long video length is by assuming the structure of the video, which again doesn't matter when they clearly haven't watched it. People who make long videos actually have ways of structuring them for the audience to have an easier time following it. Categorizing sections of the video, timestamps in the description to separate sections properly, giving character arcs, storylines, and themes their own separate area of discussion. Each of these subjects may already have their own video by another YouTuber dedicated to discussing them for a similar length in time, yet nobody complains about those videos because they can't be seen in the time it takes to take a dump. Have you ever taken the time to think that maybe people talk about things in length for a reason? Because they want to articulate their criticisms clearly and to thoroughly elaborate their arguments? Nah, it's because they're lazy and just want to make easy views and money off a hot button topic. Half the time they're so stupid they claim it's to take advantage of the algorithm. Yeah, because YouTube is known for rewarding channels that don't frequently upload content on a weekly basis. I get that maybe you don't have the time to watch a long review in one sitting, but here's the thing, you don't have to. Obviously there's no prize for watching these videos all at one time, so you're free to take a break from them and come back later. You can freely watch the review in pieces. It's what I do, and if you still don't like the idea of watching a video that's too long for your attention span or otherwise are just not interested in this type of content, no one is holding you hostage to watch it. You can freely ignore it and go about your internet business. It's really not that hard. But no, we have to engage in targeted harassment and hound out these content creators for the sake of Twitter clout. We have to take screenshots of the thumbnail or the title or the runtime without any added context because we have to get back at this YouTuber because we're easily triggered by the premise of the video. Again, a video they didn't even watch. Anyone who does this sort of thing does not deserve to be taken seriously in the slightest. If long-length videos don't interest you, that's one thing, but going out of your way to harass someone on Twitter by spreading lies about them without even bothering to watch the content and making a judgment call based on a bad faith assumption is just a really shitty thing to do. But hey, maybe the length alone isn't the problem with these people. Let's talk about the second argument they make. It's been this amount of time and you're still criticizing this specific movie / TV show / video game? This is ultimately the worst of the two. With the long video bad argument, you can at least put together the possibility that they might have watched some of the video. This argument is 100% worthless because it amounts to nothing but a knee-jerk reaction to the title. So now they're trying to place a time limit for when a piece of media can be discussed. Come on guys, The Last Jedi came out 5 years ago. She-Hulk and Pinocchio just came out a few months ago. Go hate those instead. You do realize that new stuff doesn't stop old stuff from being criticized, right? Since when was there a rule dictating how long it can be before talking about a certain film is no longer socially acceptable? By that logic, this video on Jingle All the Way is bad because the movie is 26 years old. Yeah, The Last Jedi came out in 2017, but Disaster Movie came out in 2008 and people still shit on that movie. There is literally no such thing as a restriction on the time frame for when a movie can be discussed. Any piece of media can be talked about at any time. Hell, if it was socially unacceptable to talk about a movie years or decades after it was released, a lot of Disney classics would have disappeared into obscurity. Some of the greatest movies ever made are decades old and people still talk about those on a regular basis. Heck, some of the worst movies of all time are decades old and people still talk about them. This is a primary example of gatekeeping if I've ever seen one. I love how these people like to accuse me of gatekeeping when they're literally doing the same thing but far worse. This argument has been regurgitated ad nauseum in response to negative criticism of a movie to the point that it literally means nothing. I'm honestly struggling to come up with a more complex way to debunk this argument because it's such an effortless and piss-poor attempt to defend horribly made movies, TV shows, and games that it's just incredibly easy to dismiss it. There never has been, and never will be, a time limit for when a specific movie or TV show or video game can be talked about, whether it's positively or negatively. But now here's where we start stretching into trickier territory and how desperate the people who make these comments are. Because this actually goes a lot deeper than you think. Remember at the beginning of the video when I said this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem in terms of reactionary responses to media criticism on YouTube? That's because it's not just Star Wars they do this with. This is a user by the name of Gaming Magic 13. Who recently started to make a name for himself with his movie reviews on Pixar films, specifically Toy Story 4 and Incredibles 2. As you might have already guessed, his video essays take the lengthy approach in which he goes through each movie scene by scene, carefully picking apart every single problem with the dialogue, characters' actions, and inconsistencies with the previous entries. And I have to say, they're very well made critiques. Do I agree with him when it comes to the idea of Toy Story 4 and Incredibles 2 being thoroughly offensive sequels? No, but he makes the many flaws of both movies very clear, to the point that you can easily see why they fall short and are significantly weaker compared to the originals. You can tell he put a lot of time and hard work into making these videos, and it paid off for him pretty well with the views and reception he's received on YouTube. They're well paced and he does a really good job articulating his criticisms. And how did Twitter respond to this?
Every time.
I'm shocked. Truly I am. This is my shocked face. It really shows how out of touch these people are with reality if they're willing to use these arguments against media criticism even when Star Wars is not involved in any way. In this corner, you have a series of well thought out, well edited, and well worded reviews that put a lot of careful and delicate time into analyzing their respective movies. And in this corner, you have a crowd of intellectually stunted morons who are going out of their way to antagonize someone just because they're easily threatened by the concept of a movie review being too long for their attention span. I mean, if they really are willing to use these exact same arguments against reviews that aren't of The Last Jedi, then it's not because they're tired of TLJ discourse. They're just a bunch of wusses who are easily triggered by something they glanced at for 3 seconds and just decided to mock it on Twitter without actually taking the time to think about it. But now we delve into the bigger question of why. We know by now that these are intellectually empty points, so why do people make them? Well, the answer is actually very easy to figure out. It's because they want to create a safe space that coddles their oversensitive feelings towards movies, TV shows, and video games that doesn't invalidate their values surrounding media criticism. And also to shield something they like from negative reception. Notice how every time these people come out of the woodworks to make the video length too long or review of a movie that came out years ago argument, it's always in response to a negative review of the movie in question. Believe me, I looked, and I have never seen anyone say these things to a positive critique of a piece of media. This has only ever happened when someone makes a video about how this thing is bad. The Last Jedi is viewed as a sacred cow by a lot of people, and Toy Story 4 and Incredibles 2 have at least a reasonable positive following. So of course they're gonna jump to the defense of these movies by saying things like, "The movie isn't that bad," or "You don't need to make the review that long," or "Come on, everyone has already criticized this movie, stop criticizing it and talk about something else." If these don't sound like good arguments or responses to the YouTube reviews featured throughout this video, it's because they're not. These things are never said in defense of the story, the characters, or how the themes of the narrative were handled because that isn't the goal of the people who make these comments. What it is a stand tactic. It's a miserable attempt by overly defensive fans of a certain product or people who are oversensitive to media criticism to try and silence people who are invalidating their echo chambers. They do this because they want to shout over the people who make these videos and embarrass them into being quiet. It's a non-argument they use to protect the things they love from criticism and because they want to create an environment of toxic positivity. These people are supposed to be about respecting different opinions regardless of how wrong they are, yet they actively try to silence the opinions of those who don't follow their rhetoric. They'll go for really petty and low-hanging fruit insults like, "This person has no life because he dedicates a lot of time to talking about something he hates. He needs to go outside and touch grass." Which, by the way, I actually have a steady job where I work about 5 days a week, and it's an outdoor job, so I get plenty of fresh air. You're welcome. It's the same as people who use the "no one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars" fan argument because it makes less and less sense the more you think about it. Of course no one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans. They're the only ones who care enough about Star Wars to consume any content from the series. You can take that argument and just replace Star Wars with any other franchise and it would have the same effect. No one hates Halo Anniversary more than Halo fans. No one hates every Kingdom Hearts game made by Osaka Team more than Kingdom Hearts fans. No one hates M. Night Shyamalan's The Last Airbender more than Avatar fans. No one hates Resident Evil 6 more than Resident Evil fans. No one hates The Lion King 2019 more than The Lion King fans. You starting to see the problem here? These idiots are spreading the mindset that being a fan means accepting every single thing that comes out of a series without question, even if that particular thing is of terrible quality. And if you're constantly criticizing the content the series produces, it means you're overly negative or not an actual fan. Do you really believe that I would constantly be criticizing the dogshit that Disney wants to call a sequel to the original Star Wars trilogy if I didn't have enough appreciation for the series to care about the quality of content that's been coming out of this franchise since the mouse bought the rights to Lucasfilm? If I wasn't an actual Star Wars fan, I would not have gone out of my way to discuss The Last Jedi in the lengths that I have. I would either be indifferent towards it, or if I was a person who hated Star Wars and thinks it's overrated, I would be cheering in joy that people are finally starting to hate it as much as I do, neither of which I've ever done. The only other possible reason I can think of as to why anyone would ever make these arguments is because they feel the negative reception towards The Last Jedi or Disney Star Wars in general is oversaturated. They're tired of hearing people constantly complaining and criticizing Disney Star Wars, so they try to discourage the negative reception with, "It came out years ago, get over it," or "move on and talk about something else." Okay, barring the fact that there are genuine reasons to continue criticizing and complaining about the horrible job Disney has done handling Star Wars since buying the rights from George, this is a strawman motivation for trying to silence media criticism. Hey guys, maybe the reason people are still talking about how this movie was shit is because it was shit? That would be the opposite effect of people still praising something like The Lion King or The Prince of Egypt decades after they came out, and you try to strawman them by saying, "Come on guys, they might have been good movies, but they came out years ago. Stop praising them so much and talk about something else." But no one does that because the positive reviews help them feel comfortable and it validates their safe space. The negative ones do things like ask reasonable questions and point out legitimate problems and challenge our perspective on things we love, and we can't fucking have that now, can we? This tweet made by Shitty Star Wars Takes pretty much says it all. "Well, if you think Star Wars is ruined, stop talking about it and move on to something else." There is no two ways around this. The only reason Shitty Star Wars Takes would make this tweet is because he's really sensitive when it comes to people speaking negatively about Disney Star Wars. And he's trying to get people to stop talking negatively about it specifically because he feels uncomfortable with sequel trilogy or other Disney Star Wars discourse. And he does not want people having these discussions.
And how fucking dare anyone out there make fun of Britney after all she's been through? All you people care about is readers and making money off of her. She's a human! What you don't realize is that Britney's making you all this money and all you do is write a bunch of crap about her. Leave her alone! You're lucky she even performed for you bastards! Leave Britney alone! Please!
The closer look wasn't harassing any of the actors or complaining about non-white, non-hetero representation. He was just explaining how the sequel trilogy destroyed 40 years of established lore by the collaborative retardation of J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, Kathleen Kennedy, and Bob Iger. This isn't a matter of content creators acting entitled or being unable to handle criticism. It's a neutral statement of fact. The people who spew this nonsense are actively trying to enforce toxic positivity by drowning out people who had the expectations of good storytelling and telling them they're wrong for having any sort of criticism towards these works. Something that, in spite of what they'll try to brainwash you into believing, is actually a lot worse than any form of toxic negativity. I mean, what do you think actually sounds worse? People being rightfully angry at the corporate mongoloids who butcher beloved works of art for money or brownie points from left-leaning groups of people, even if a subsection of that group might take it too far? Or the Twittermites trying to shut everyone up and act like nothing is wrong, and if you say anything to the contrary, they twist the narrative to make it look like you are the problem. These are people who are so overly sensitive to the prospect of a certain movie, television show, or video game receiving negative criticism that they will actively try to silence anyone who brings up the very real problems in these pieces of media in spite of how much harm that would cause, because they're a giant hive mind of emotionally stunted idiots who are more concerned with keeping themselves comfortable above everything else. And that level of apathy towards the growing issues with modern media is actively making things worse, and it will continue to make things worse in the future. Unless the masses finally decide to put their foots down, think with their wallets, and say they've had enough of this garbage. If you can't handle people still criticizing The Last Jedi or any of these other movies years after they came out, you need to grow up, or at the very least reevaluate what media criticism means to you. Because you're just showing people that you're less concerned with pointing out the dozens of ways that beloved franchises are being destroyed and the very real problems that have been plaguing the industry for the last several years, and more concerned with making sure that someone isn't rocking the boat too much. You have no right to dictate how long a review can be, and you have no right to dictate when it's time to stop speaking negatively about a garbage movie, TV show, or video game. These types of things have always been spoken of in long lengths and for long periods of time into the future. We did it with the George Lucas era, and we're gonna do it again with the Disney era. If you think people are allowed to praise TLJ as a groundbreaking achievement in filmmaking or a masterpiece that revolutionized Star Wars years later, then people are also allowed to criticize it years later for being a plot hole-infested mess with badly handled characters, horrible jokes, sluggish pacing, and misconstrued messages. I've seen a lot of horrible attempts to justify the avalanche of sludge that Disney has been putting out for the last several years. Whether it's in the form of Star Wars, the MCU, animated sequels, their god-awful live-action remakes, Zombie Simpsons, or selling out their morals to get China's money. But this gatekeeping non-argument dictating how long a review can be or when it's time to stop reviewing a certain piece of media really needs to die off. Because it accomplishes nothing in the grand scheme of things except telling big corporations that you're willing to bend over backwards for them and suck them off by white knighting their trash. If you don't want people to keep using that red letter media meme, then actually learn from what they were saying in that podcast and stop trying to silence criticism and act like there's nothing severely wrong with these pieces of media. And stop getting into a fit of rage whenever you hear about the latest Disney Star Wars bad video or post. Because Disney Star Wars is the prime example of why this needs to keep happening. Whether you like it or not, whether you can stomach it or not, the simple fact remains. The Star Wars sequel trilogy and The Last Jedi in particular will continue to be criticized well into the future for how badly they were written, directed, and produced, regardless of what dipshits on Twitter would prefer. So I've been thinking for a while about what would be the best way to end this video with all the stuff I talked about. An update on my review of The Rise of Skywalker, my further closing thoughts on The Last Jedi as a movie, but I ultimately decided that I just want to be direct to the people whom this video is addressing. So, if you're someone who looks at any of these videos and shit talks them on Twitter or elsewhere because you think the length of the review is too long, or because you think they're needlessly dragging out hate for a movie that came out years ago, shut the fuck up. Just shut the fuck up. It has become so tiring to see you shit-eating pussies desperately grasping at straws to justify the insulting storytelling that these stooges put on display so that you don't have to confront reality and accept the fact that the Star Wars sequel trilogy is a giant mess of storytelling and filmmaking, and that Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams are incompetent fuckheads who can't write a consistent story to save their asses, and that Disney buying Lucasfilm was a mistake on every single level. No, stop. Don't try to make this about disrespecting different opinions, or subjectivity, or how it's wrong to say something is objectively bad, because the moment somebody says Rey is a Mary Sue, you immediately enter an anger-induced stroke and start shouting "you're wrong" at the top of your keyboards. This is about your inability to suck up criticism towards your sacred cow, or a piece of media you otherwise think is a victim of undeserved hate, and your insufferable man-child fantasy that this god-awful trilogy was anything other than the abysmal destruction of a classic story. I mean it. You are just so incredibly overly sensitive to being told that these movies are horribly made dog shit that you will huddle together on Twitter to lick the ass of an actual sexist in order to get the sensation that your snowflake feelings are being validated. Just shut the fuck